And can I just say a very special welcome to those of you from Parker Hill Church in northeastern Pennsylvania. Parker Hill, you need to know that we at LCBC are so excited about the possibility of deepening our relationship with you so that together we might introduce more people to Jesus across the state of Pennsylvania. So, in this series, we're actually talking about relationships. And you and I both know that relationships are not easy. All relationships are complicated, but today I want to talk specifically about the relationship that exists between a husband and a wife. Today I want to talk about some secrets to enjoying marriage, actually 7 secrets to be exact, that I think will help you enjoy your marriage if you happen to be married. And by the way, can I just say that these are 7 secrets that will build strong relationships whether you're married or not. And so even if you're not married, these 7 relationship building secrets are for you as well. And so as we begin, I hope you understand that strong marriages take work. They don't just happen naturally. And one of the biggest mistakes that we make in marriage is to think that somehow all we have to do is do what comes naturally and then our marriage is going to be strong. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. The truth is that you and I, if we just do what comes naturally in our marriage, then we're going to drift apart. Relationships don't stand still. You're either moving closer together or you're moving further apart, but you are not standing still. So don't drift through your relationships. That's why some time back, a woman actually reached out and asked for help and advice on her marriage. And she actually said this. She said, "Do all marriages go stale after 5 years?" She said, "Ours has." And she went on to say that my husband, he doesn't seem to talk much to her anymore and used to talk about kids, but now the kids are grown, and so we really don't have much to converse about. And she said, "I have no real complaints about my husband, but the old excitement, it's just gone. We watch television, we read, we have friends, but when we're alone together, it's pretty dull. We even sleep in separate rooms now." She said, "Is there any way," she asked, "to recapture the old magic?" Now here's the sad thing. Sadly, this woman is not alone in what she's experiencing in her marriage. She's not the only one to have these kind of feelings, which I suppose is why one of the most often asked questions of marriage counselors is this: why don't we love each other the way we used to? Fortunately, God understands how difficult it is for people to get along, and difficulty in relationships doesn't just apply to marriages, it applies to any relationship, whether it's a friendship, a family, a neighbor, a coworker, you name it. You put any 2 people together, and it's going to take work to get along. And so God actually instructs us, and He tells us, and He tells you, He tells me, He says, look, you've got to work hard at your relationships. Concerning all relationships, God actually says through the Apostle Paul, he says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit. In other words, good relationships aren't just going to happen naturally. Relationships are going to take hard work. And when it comes to marriages, strong marriages don't just happen. They're intentional. They take time, commitment. Most of all, they take a lot of effort. And so today, I actually want to give us 7 areas that you ought to be focusing on and you ought to be working on in your marriage. And today I want to give you 7 areas where you need to give special attention and extra focus. Today I actually want to talk to you about, I'm just going to call them 7 secrets of a satisfying marriage. And so I would encourage you, grab your phone, grab a piece of paper. I think you want to write these 7 things down, whether you're married or not, any relationship they're going to apply to. And so here we go. What do you do to keep your marriage from going flat? What do you do to keep that spark in your relationship? What do you do to ensure that your marriage doesn't lose its pizzazz? And so secret number 1, rekindle the romance. Rekindle the romance. I mean, one of the real problems with many marriages is that what you did to win your mate's love in the first place, you've not continued to do the same thing in order to keep your mate's love. In other words, over time you've stopped courting your mate, which is why secret number 1 to having a satisfying marriage is rekindle the romance. And do you realize that husbands and wives see each other at absolutely the worst part of the day? I mean, you see each other for a few minutes in the morning when you're up and getting going, and not only do you not look your best at that point, but you're stressed, you're trying to get ready for work, you're feeling the pressure of getting the kids off to school as well as walking the dog, and you're just trying to get out the door and get on with your day. And then at the end of the day, you see each other again for a few minutes when you're tired and you're exhausted and you've got nothing left to give and nothing else you want to say, and you see your mate at the worst times of the day. which means if you're going to see each other at a better time, that somehow you need to intentionally plan for romance. And now the cool thing about the Bible is it's full of wisdom on how to have good relationships. For instance, Proverbs 5:19 says, "Let your mate's affection fill you at all times with delight." In other words, make your relationship a priority, become best friends, have fun together. You've got to find some things that you both like to do together. You've got to find common ground, and it has to be intentional because, again, strong marriages don't just happen. So, let's suppose the fire has gone out of your relationship. In order to rekindle that fire in any marriage, the first thing you've got to do is to remember. You've got to remember the good times. You've got to relive past experiences and the happy feelings that you had when you first fell in love. You've got to remember and think back on the good times. And sometimes couples who are on the verge of a breakup will actually say to me, "David, we never really loved each other." But I'll always say, "But you did. At one time, there was something that attracted you to her. There was something that attracted you to him, and you need to relive those experiences and remember back to the time when you loved one another." And then as you remember those good times, you turn back, and you actually reverse directions. It's a complete turnaround, and you need to reverse your attitude towards your mate, and you choose to turn the whole thing around, and you choose to act in a loving way, and you choose to act in a romantic way, even if you don't feel romantic, even if you don't want to. And then you begin to do the things that you did at first. Act the same way towards your mate as you did when you were madly in love with each other. Whatever you did to fall in love, you've got to continue to do those same things in order to stay in love. See, it's a whole lot easier to fall in love than it is to stay in love, and we get complacent. We stop doing the things that we did when we first fell in love. And here's the good news. The actions that caused romance in the first place, you start those actions again, and the romance begins to blossom again, and so you remember what you did at first, you turn back, you turn around, and then you just do it. I told you a couple of weeks ago about my first date with Ruth. Our first date was actually on February 10th, and we attended a banquet in Amarillo, Texas, which was about 100 miles away from Lubbock, Texas, which is where both Ruth and I were living as we were attending Texas Tech University. And so our very first date, we literally spent hours and hours together riding in the car, individual attention focused only on each other for almost 12 hours on our first date. And I've got to tell you, February 10th was one of the greatest nights of my life. And told you a couple of weeks ago how the next day after our first date, I sent flowers to Ruth, and then she invited me to her room to see those flowers. And it was then that I discovered that I was not the only person vying for Ruth's attention. There were 4 other bouquets from wimpy little guys that she was dating at the time. And as our relationship continued to grow and deepen, I continued to send Ruth flowers on the 10th of every month. And I got to tell you, I annihilated the competition. And on February 10th, exactly 1 year later, we were married. And to this day, I still send Ruth flowers on the 10th of every single month. And no, I actually don't. I stopped doing it. So, somewhere along the way, I stopped sending Ruth flowers. And you say, what happened? Why did I stop sending Ruth flowers? Well, what happened is what happens to all of us. I just got complacent, maybe taking each other for granted. And the thing is, we never intend to become complacent. It just happens. You sort of drift into complacency, which takes me to secret number 2. Secret number 2 to a strong and satisfying marriage is to pay attention to each other's interest. Pay attention to the things that the other person is interested in. I mean, the very first sign that tipped you off that you were falling in love was when you noticed somebody else was paying attention to you. You began to pay attention to them. And do you remember how much attention you paid each other before you were married? I mean, you wrote notes to each other, you made phone calls, you'd spend hours talking together, you'd send cards, you bought flowers, you brought gifts over and over. And what all these things were saying is to the other person, you have my total and undivided attention. Somewhere along the way, we get complacent. We stop doing the things that we did when we first fell in love, and we stop paying attention to each other. And the point is, you've got to make time for each other. You've got to show each other attention. Giving attention to your mate, it's critical, even if you don't feel like giving it, even when you don't feel like you're receiving it. And I liked what Morton T. Kelsey actually said. He said, the real test of my love is not that I feel loved, but that the other person feels loved by me. So can I say one of the quickest ways to show attention to your spouse is to actually listen to your spouse. Listen first. Listen to your spouse. Proverbs 18:13 says, listen before you answer. If you don't, you're being stupid and insulting. So the quickest way to show attention is to listen, and it's so easy to say, but so hard to do. I mean, there's so many distractions. For me, it used to be the newspaper. Now it's my phone, and perhaps for you it's the computer or the TV, and yet the quickest way to show attention is to simply listen to your mate. And when you listen, can I just encourage you, watch your body language? Studies actually show that only 7% of what we communicate is through our words. Only 7%. We're talking, we think we're communicating. Only 7% through our words. 43% of what we communicate to your husband, to your wife, is by the tone of your voice, how fast you're speaking or how slow you're speaking, or the volume, the rate. That's 43%. The other 50% of what we communicate is through our body language. Facial expressions, gestures, posture. Those things all say, hey, I'm listening. You listen with your eyes and just be aware of the nonverbal messages that you're sending when supposedly you are listening. Secret number 3, use the power of affirmation. But if you want to put a spark back into your marriage, start affirming and appreciating and admiring the strengths of your spouse instead of focusing on their weaknesses. And I think that's why Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5:11, he says, so encourage each other and build each other up. Every one of us wants to be admired. We all want to be appreciated. We all want to be looked up to, and we fall in love with people who admire us, and that's how you fell in love. Somebody was paying attention to you. They affirmed you, and you fell in love with him, or you fell in love with her. One of my favorite definitions of love is by E.M. Saran, and they actually said this. They said, love is an agreement on the part of two people to overestimate each other. And I love that. Love is this agreement by two people to overestimate each other. And I look at that and I go, man, that's gold, that's wonderful. And it actually lines right along with what Webster defines as romance. Webster says this, it says romance is something that lacks basis in fact. It lacks basis in fact, meaning it's not really even real. It exaggerates or invents details or incidents, meaning you're just so infatuated with each other, you kind of create what's going on, and you see beyond the obvious, and you learn to see beyond each other's faults, and still somehow you find ways to actually affirm one another. And I know you may say, David, when she starts appreciating me, that's when I'll start appreciating her. And can I just tell you, if that's your approach, then that's an immature response, and you are headed for a train wreck. Because your marriage is what you make it to be, and so do the work to make your marriage strong. Secret number 4. Discover the gift of affection. Discover the gift of affection. Isn't it interesting how we can always tell who the unmarried couples are? I mean, you see them. They can't keep their hands off each other. And when you see a couple walking hand in hand, don't you just assume that they're married, or do you assume that they're dating? And do you remember how affectionate you were before you actually were married? And when Ruth and I started dating, I actually drove a 1967 GTO. And my GTO had 2 bucket seats in the front, and then between the seats, it had this cold metal console between the seats. And it was where in that console, I actually kept my favorite 8-track tapes. And as cold and as hard as that console was between our 2 seats, Ruth would ride up there sitting on that cold metal console because we wanted to be as close together as we possibly could be. Maybe you've heard some of the studies that talk about newborn babies and the fact that they can die from a lack of touch. And it's called skin deprivation. And babies that aren't touched enough in the early days of infancy, they actually die from a lack of touch. And can I just tell you, here's the thing, so can marriages. Marriages can die from a lack of touch. And researchers at UCLA actually did a study. They found that, ladies, if you'll hug your husband 3 times a day, you will most likely increase his lifespan by up to 3 years. 3 hugs a day is all it takes. And men, if all of a sudden your wife stops hugging you today, then your marriage may not be as strong as you had imagined it to be. And you might say, I don't feel affectionate. And here's the thing, you won't feel affection until you start acting affectionate again. And you can act your way into a feeling. It's up to you. Remember, feelings follow our actions. And can I just say one more thing? Appearance influences affection, and it's a fact of life. And when you first started dating, you got all spruced up and your hair was combed and you wore the nicest clothes and you wanted to look the best that you could. And for some of you, especially during this COVID season, the most spiritual thing you can do is go home and throw out some of those ratty clothes that your wife or your husband has been complaining about for the last several years. And secret number 5, bring back a sense of adventure to your marriage. I mean, if we look at most marriages, they're dull. But you need to understand God intended them for enjoyment. That's why Ecclesiastes 9:9 says, enjoy life with your wife. And so let me just ask you, are you fun to live with? I mean, when was the last time you did something with your spouse just for the fun of it? When was the last time you did something just to break the monotony and something crazy just for the fun of it with your husband or wife? And the problem is most of us don't take the time to have fun, and we think, fun is something that we'll do after we finish everything else, all the other work. But the reality is, you'll never finish everything else. You'll never finish all the work. The work will never be done. And as a result, the fun in your marriage, it gets shoved right out the window. And the person who takes last place in your life ends up being your spouse. We say, she'll understand, he'll understand. We're busy right now. Besides, the busyness, it's only temporary. But the thing is, it's never temporary. As temporary, as hectic as your lifestyle becomes, it easily becomes a permanent lifestyle, and you scheduled fun right out of your marriage, and then you wonder, why have the feelings died? And can I just say this isn't only true with your mate, but also with your children as well, and then you wonder why your kids are slipping away. And the late Lee Iacocca actually once said, he said, I'm constantly amazed by the number of people who can't seem to control their own schedules. He said, over the years, I've had many executives come to me and say with pride, boy, last year I worked so hard I didn't even take any vacation. And Iacocca says his response to that, he said, what I want to say is, man, that's nothing to be proud of. You mean to tell me that you can take responsibility for an $80 million project and yet you can't plan enough to plan 2 weeks out of the year to go off with your family and your wife and have some fun? And basically what he's saying and what God tells us is, man, you need to learn to date your mate. And you can date anytime. It doesn't have to be at night. It doesn't have to be expensive. But do something together. The only rule is no kids. And you've got to do it without kids, and something that's mutually fun and enjoyable for the two of you. And secret number 6, make a commitment to see your marriage through. I mean, it takes commitment to have a satisfying and strong marriage. That's why God actually says this in Malachi 2:16, and he's strong. He says, I hate divorce. He says, make sure that you do not break your promise to be faithful to your mate. And God says that because he knows all about the pain and he knows all about the hurt that accompanies divorce. And so he says, don't do it. And here's the thing. You'll never build a great and strong marriage if divorce is always an option for you. If it's always back there, somewhere lurking in the back of your mind as a potential option, you will never build a great marriage. It's just too easy to walk out, and when the times get tough and every bone in your body is saying, I'm not taking this anymore, I'm out of here. If divorce is an option, at some point you will choose to take it. And so can I just challenge you to lock the escape hatch of your marriage if you want to have a strong marriage. Throw the key away. And it's kind of that you said it in your vows, till death do us part. And what you've got to say is, man, I made a promise to God and I'm going to keep that promise. And commitment is what makes the marriage strong. And divorce is even an option, then you're not going to put forth the effort to make your marriage last. And commitment forces us to change, and it's commitment that forces us to be flexible, and it's commitment that forces us to compromise and grow instead of being selfish. And when you make a commitment, it means you don't use divorce as a threat when you find yourself mad. When you get mad, you don't even hint at leaving. You don't even use the words. These are words that are off limits, hitting below the belt. They are unacceptable words to use in the middle of a fight. And no matter how mad you are, no matter how angry you are, no matter how much in that moment you may hate the other person, Man, do not bring up the issue of divorce because divorce isn't even an option. It's not even a choice. That's what commitment actually means. I actually came across what I think is a great definition for commitment, and I think we need a definition for commitment because I'm not sure most of us understand the true meaning of commitment. And here's the definition. It says, commitment means being willing to be unhappy for a while until you get things worked out. Being willing to be unhappy for a while until you get things worked out. So remember, strong marriages don't just happen. They've got to be worked on. It takes effort. It requires commitment. And I need to stop right here and be real clear. What I'm talking about today is for most marriages, but not all marriages. I'm not talking about staying in an abusive relationship. There's no place for an abusive relationship in any relationship, and that includes marriage. And if you're experiencing abuse in your home, then you need to get out, and you need to get out now, and call us. Contact us at the church office, and we will help you, but do not stay in an abusive relationship. And if you happen to be the abuser, then you need to man up, and you need to call us, and we'll help you get help because there's no excuse for your actions. There's no excuse for abuse in any kind of relationship. And one last step, one last secret to a strong marriage, and that's to tap into the power of Jesus that's already inside of you. See, if you have Jesus in your life, then Jesus is already inside of you. He gives you the power. He gives you the desire to do the other 6 secrets that we just talked about. And Jesus gives you love when you run out of love. And Jesus' Spirit is in you. And so you ask Him to help you think the way that He thinks, to treat your husband the way Jesus would treat your husband, or to treat your wife the way Jesus would treat your wife. And because the greatest thing that you can do for your husband, or the greatest thing that you could do for your wife right now, is to become more and more like Jesus and begin to treat them the way Jesus would actually treat them. And you say, how do I do that? Well, first you invite Jesus into your life, and then you just ask Him. You say, God, I just need you to fill me with your thoughts. And then you make a commitment of your marriage to Jesus and a commitment of your family to Jesus. And you say, Jesus, I dedicate my marriage to you. I dedicate my family to you. And can I just ask you, why would you choose not to tap into the power of Jesus that's already right inside of you? And so here's the bottom line. Marriage is what you make of it. And your marriage will become what you are both committed to making it. And God has given you the tools to experience a rich and satisfied marriage. And so let me just challenge you to evaluate, to make the necessary changes. Talk to God. Follow God's plan. Look at these secrets again and again, and God can help make your marriage strong. And so I want to give you just a couple of steps real quick just to get started. And maybe the most basic place to start in this whole process, the most basic thing you can do, is to ask God to begin to soften your heart towards your spouse. Ask God to soften your heart to actually begin to rekindle your love for your spouse. And you may say your heart is cold. You may say, David, there's no fire, there's really no feelings. And so start right now and ask God to soften your heart and rekindle your love for your spouse. And then go back and do the things that you first did when you first fell in love. And I'll just tell you real quick, if you haven't been taking notes, don't worry. We'll actually post the list of these 7 secrets of a satisfying, strong marriage on the LCBC app later this week. And so you can go back and grab them off the LCBC app. And then if you want a resource to actually help you in your marriage, start out by saying, God, soften my heart. But if you want a resource, let me suggest a book for you to read. It's called Saving Your Marriage Before It Starts. It's by Les and Leslie Parrott. It's a great resource for married couples and for those of you who are in a serious relationship. It's something to go back and read together. But I want to make another challenge to some of you. I want to actually challenge you in a bigger way. I'm going to ask some of you to step up and take the Better Love Challenge. And the Better Love Challenge is actually this, is to make a commitment for 2 hours a week for the next 6 weeks to actually work on your marriage to make it better, to make it the best marriage it can be. And you might have a good marriage now. Why not make it better? And each of our marriages have room to grow. And so my challenge to you is decide to grow your marriage by taking the Better Love Challenge. And let me tell you what it is. The Better Love Challenge actually involves joining a group of other like-minded couples who are also intent on growing their marriage and to learn and to laugh together. And the Better Love Challenge only lasts for 6 weeks. So you're in, you're out. It involves making a commitment to participate in either an in-person or an online group. And just 1 hour a week, you commit to meet with that group. And then you also commit to an hour a week to be very intentional with your spouse. And here's the thing. So I just need to tell you up front, we only have 200 spots to take the Better Love Challenge. And these 200 spots are open to all of us at LCBC, to all at Parker Hill. And you can go to the lcbcchurch.com website and find more about the Better Love Challenge. But I would tell you, don't put it off. Do it now. I mean, why wouldn't you want a stronger marriage in just 6 weeks? And so I actually want you to hear from a couple, Bruce and Ann. Bruce and Ann are actually part of the LCBC Berks family, and Bruce and Ann have been married for 58 years. And as you listen to their story, I believe what you'll agree with me is that Bruce and Ann, they actually embody these 7 secrets of a satisfying marriage. Listen to Bruce and Ann.
My name is Bruce Jones.
And I'm Ann, his wife, for 58 years.
And we're members of the Berks campus of LCBC. We met, actually, on a blind date. Shouldn't say this, but it took 2 blind dates that were set up by friends of ours.
Because he didn't show up to the first one. Do you remember where we went? Do you?
Yeah, I remember where we went.
Where'd we go?
We went for a dance, actually. I'm not a dancer, but we went dancing.
We went to Sunnybrook Ballroom. So that was our blind date.
Little did I know how desperate she was.
That was the beginning of a beautiful time, beautiful relationship.
It was.
We had been dating now from the end of November to February. So of course I was expecting that we were going to get engaged on Valentine's Day. And I was a student nurse at the time, and I told all my friends in the dorm, when I come back tonight, I'm going to have a ring. After Bruce and I had our dinner date, I didn't have a ring. And I was so disappointed. So the next night, Bruce and I were going to go to my parents' house for dinner. And when we walked into my parents' living room, there was my dad, my mother, my sister, and my brother staring at us. Popeye Theater was on the TV, and in the midst of that romantic scene, Bruce popped the question and gave me a ring. So there you go. We were engaged on February 15th.
So we've had a lot of fun with that date.
Yes, we have. And then we proceeded to get married the end of August, the hottest day of the year, in a church without air conditioning. But it was a great day.
It was quite a start.
We had made a decision to build a starter home in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And you watched the house get built nail by nail, I think.
Yeah. It was quite an experience for us. I mean, here we are. We're just a newly married couple. You know, we didn't have any money.
No.
We really even couldn't afford the down payment with the contractor. So we had to borrow the money for the down payment.
Choosing to have a house built was really a stretch for us. Looking back, was that the wisest thing we could have done? I don't know, but the Lord kept giving us favor, so we just kept going forward. After our first daughter, 2 years later, we had the second daughter, and then a few years later, we had our third daughter, and I almost died after her. I was in intensive care for a while.
That was a shock. That was really a tough time.
One of the gifts of being married so long is that we can look back and we can see how the Lord provided for us. Yeah. You know, when you're going through all that stuff, it's like, this is just really hard.
We didn't always appreciate, how the Lord was working in our lives, maybe at the moment.
So we spent 13 years in Lebanon County.
In a house that we thought we would live in forever.
Yeah. But then after 13 years, Bruce got transferred back to Berks County, which is where we started.
It's funny how we have our way of looking at things, and God has his plans, and his plans are a whole lot better than ours, but we don't always realize it at the time.
He was working as an engineer for the electric company. I was working as a nurse for the hospital. So we were like ships passing in the night. Sometimes we didn't have a lot of time to talk and to share. When I would share a deep feeling, and this wasn't just fluff talk about groceries or anything. This was like really coming from who I was.
I would kind of listen to her for a while, and and then kind of stop listening at one point. I would jump into solution mode, and I would start trying to figure out how to fix it.
That would just make me mad. It's like, I don't need you to fix me. So it really wasn't working, but it was through the Lord's help, because we both were believers in Jesus.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of times we were clueless what we were doing, Jesus was faithful to us and helped us. And gave us the revelation that sometimes you just need to listen. And when Bruce realized all he needed to do was listen with acceptance and not judgment, that was the answer. That brought such healing and such grace into our marriage.
The Lord impressed on me, it's like, wait a minute, you guys are a team, you're together. I didn't put you together to be separated, especially when you come to me. At that point, I started to realize that, hey, my understanding of God has to move from my head to my heart. And when that happened, then we started praying together.
Well,
that was our automatic thing to go to as far as seeking guidance. Was first thing is pray about it.
And that didn't come overnight. We're talking months, maybe even a few years of stumbling through this process of trying to figure out how to do life. When you're both working, by this time we would have had 4 children. It's like, how do we do this? There were many times we just sat on the sofa and we held hands, and it was like, Lord, we need your help. The girls all went to college. They came home for a little bit and then left. But then there was a day when the last daughter moved out into her own apartment. And so then we were really alone together again.
It's interesting being the father of the bride, because as the father of the bride, you get to walk the bride down the aisle. I'm standing in the back of the church with one of my daughters ready to walk her down the aisle, and I pull out of my pocket a picture, a photograph, an old photograph of her and me. We both end up crying in the back of the church, So that there's a whole church full of people, and they're probably wondering what in the world's going on back there.
Before we were married, he had a lot of hair, but after being married to me and 4 girls, not so much anymore. So now it was our time to figure out, okay, who are we now?
Now what do we do?
After all these years with the kids pretty much being our focus. But for me, it's been a discovery time to discover how beautiful our life is, because now we can take time. We can take time to read a book and discuss it. It's been a time when we get more active in our church community to be able to serve in different ways. We did a missions trip. We went on a missions trip to Peru together.
It seemed like to us the foundation of our relationship was the love and the faithfulness of God. Even at times when we didn't know it, even in times when we didn't see it, even in times when we didn't seek it, it was still there, His love and His faithfulness. We've learned that it isn't just the 2 of us together. We are together. We made a vow when we were married. 2 are better than 1, it says in Ecclesiastes, but it also says a cord of 3 strands cannot be broken. And so that 3rd strand has always been the Lord in our relationship, even when we didn't realize it. Ann and I are still, our lives still being changed by Christ,
Yes.
even
Amen.
after all these years.